Step back in time to one of America's toughest eras, the Great Depression. When money was tight, families still found comfort in the kitchen, turning simple, humble ingredients into meals that nourished both body and soul. Today, we're uncovering 10 Depression-era recipes that not only survived the hardships of the 1930s but still taste amazing on our tables today. From hearty stews to sweet surprises, each dish tells a story of resilience, creativity, and the flavors that brought families together in hard times. Before we dive in, make sure you hit subscribe and join our journey through America's lost recipes so you never miss a taste of history you can recreate at home. Hoover stew was more than a recipe, it was survival on a plate during the darkest years of the Great Depression. Families across America relied on this simple, filling dish when paychecks vanished and pantry shelves thinned out. It combined whatever people had, usually macaroni, canned tomatoes, sliced hot dogs, and beans, into one pot that stretched far enough to feed a hungry household. Even though it was humble, it carried the warmth of togetherness, because everyone gathered around the same pot with the same hope that tomorrow would be a little easier. The origins of Hoover stew are tied to the makeshift kitchens in government-run relief camps, where thousands sought shelter and basic meals. Volunteers needed food that was cheap, fast, and capable of feeding long lines of struggling families. What they created became a nationwide staple. It was not fancy, and it was not meant to be. It was honest food built on resourcefulness and necessity. At home, mothers often adapted it based on what was available. Some added leftover vegetables, while others kept it simple with just pasta and tomatoes. The beauty of Hoover stew came from this flexibility. It changed from town to town, pot to pot, but its purpose stayed the same: stretch small ingredients into something comforting and filling. What makes this dish so memorable today is the story it carries. Every bite reflects an era when Americans learned to do more with less, relying on creativity and determination to keep their families fed. Hoover stew endures not because of its ingredients, but because of the spirit behind it. It reminds us that even in the toughest moments, a warm bowl of food can bring people together. That legacy is why people recreate it today, appreciating its simplicity and the resilience it represents in every serving. Poor man's meal became a household hero during the Great Depression, a time when families had to stretch every penny and still find a way to put something warm on the table. This simple dish relied on potatoes, onions, and a small amount of ground meat, ingredients that were inexpensive, filling, and easy to find even during the toughest years. What made it so beloved was not just how cheap it was, but how it brought a sense of comfort when everything else felt uncertain. The recipe became popular thanks to factory workers and railroad families who needed meals that were fast, hearty, and flexible. Potatoes were the star, caramelizing slowly in a skillet while onions softened and released their sweetness. A little bit of meat, usually whatever was leftover or affordable, added flavor without stretching the budget. Everything cooked together, creating a savory, golden mixture that tasted far richer than it cost. It was the kind of food that filled the house with warmth long before it reached the table. In many homes, this dish became a nightly ritual. Families gathered around modest wooden tables, sharing plates of poor man's meal while talking about the day's struggles and hopes. It brought a sense of normalcy and togetherness when jobs were scarce and bills kept piling up. The meal reminded people that even in hardship, there was still room for a little comfort. Today, poor man's meal survives not because of its affordability, but because of its flavor and story. It represents a time when Americans used creativity to transform basic ingredients into something genuinely delicious. When people cook it now, they are not just frying potatoes and onions, they are recreating a piece of history. Every bite carries the resilience of families who refuse to give up, finding warmth and dignity in the simplest of meals. Egg drop soup was one of the quiet heroes of Depression-era kitchens, a dish built from almost nothing, yet soothing enough to make a hard day feel a little lighter. At a time when families struggled to stretch every ingredient, the simple broth and egg creation became a lifesaver. It required only water or thin stock, a pinch of seasoning, and a single egg whisked in to form delicate ribbons. Even when pantries were nearly empty, people could still manage to put this warm, comforting soup on the table. Its roots go back to immigrant households, especially Chinese American communities, where this style of soup had long been a staple. But during the 1930s, the idea spread rapidly across the country because it offered something rare during tough times: gentle flavor, warmth, and nourishment without costing more than a few cents. Parents often served it to children who needed something filling but easy on the stomach, especially on days when better meals were out of reach. What made egg drop soup special was not complexity, but humility. A thin broth simmered quietly while the egg, beaten until silky, was poured in a slow stream. Some added scallions if they had them, others slipped in a few noodles or leftover vegetables. Most kept it plain, respecting its simple purpose: stretch one egg into a meal that served an entire family. Even today, this soup carries the memory of resilience. People recreate it not only because it tastes good, but because it symbolizes the resourcefulness of a generation that refused to give up. In every bowl, there is a reminder that comfort does not always come from abundance. Sometimes, it comes from transforming the smallest ingredient into something warm enough to lift the spirit. Stuffed potato pancakes were one of those Depression-era dishes that felt almost magical, turning the most ordinary ingredients into something that tasted far richer than it looked. Potatoes were cheap, filling, and available even when other foods disappeared from store shelves. Families relied on them day after day, but when they wanted to make the meal feel special, they transformed those potatoes into golden pancakes with a simple, hearty filling tucked inside. These pancakes were inspired by Eastern European immigrant traditions, where potatoes had long been used to create comforting meals that stretched across generations. During the Great Depression, that tradition blended into American kitchens. Mothers grated potatoes by hand, squeezed out the moisture, and mixed them with a little flour and salt to form a batter. Inside each pancake, they added whatever they could spare: mashed vegetables, leftover meat, or even a bit of cheese if they were lucky. Nothing fancy, nothing wasted, just pure resourcefulness. As the pancakes hit the hot skillet, they sizzled and crisped around the edges, releasing an aroma that instantly drew everyone toward the kitchen. Kids waited eagerly, watching each pancake flip and turn a deeper shade of gold. The filling warmed through, blending with the potatoes to create a dish that felt comforting, generous, and surprisingly delicious despite its simplicity. What made stuffed potato pancakes unforgettable was the emotion behind them. They were a small celebration in a time when celebrations were rare. A way for families to share something warm, hearty, and hopeful, even when money was tight. Today, people recreate these pancakes to remember the creativity and determination of those who cooked with love, not luxury. Every bite carries echoes of a time when the simplest ingredients held the power to bring families together. Eggs with peppers and potatoes was one of those Depression-era meals that felt like a small victory on a hard day. It took 3 modest ingredients: eggs, peppers, and potatoes, and turned them into a skillet full of color, comfort, and hope. At a time when families counted every penny, dishes like this proved that creativity mattered just as much as money. With a single pan and a handful of simple ingredients, people could still bring something hearty and satisfying to the table. Potatoes were the backbone, sliced thin so they could stretch further and cook evenly. They browned slowly in a bit of fat, creating crispy edges and soft centers. Peppers added a burst of brightness, especially when fresh produce was scarce. Many families grew them right in small backyard gardens, making this dish one of the few ways to enjoy vibrant flavor during difficult years. When the eggs finally cracked into the pan, everything came together, the heat firming up the whites while the yolks stayed warm and rich. This dish became common in rural areas and among immigrant households, where combining affordable vegetables with eggs was already a trusted tradition. It offered protein, warmth, and enough energy to face long days of work or worry. Parents often cooked it early in the morning so their families could start the day with something filling, or served it at night when money was too tight for meat. What makes eggs with peppers and potatoes memorable today is how beautifully it reflects the spirit of the era. It reminds us that meals do not have to be expensive to be meaningful. Back then, every ingredient had purpose, and every dish was made with intention. When people recreate it now, they taste more than eggs and vegetables. They taste the resilience of families who found comfort and dignity in the simplest foods. Cabbage and noodles was a Depression-era favorite that transformed humble ingredients into a dish both filling and comforting. With meat scarce and groceries expensive, families needed meals that could feed the whole household without stretching the budget. Cabbage was cheap, abundant, and easy to store, while noodles or simple homemade egg pasta added substance and warmth. Together, they created a meal that felt satisfying even in the hardest times. This dish became popular in immigrant communities, particularly among Eastern Europeans, where cabbage and noodles had long been a staple. During the 1930s, it spread across American kitchens, valued not for luxury but for reliability. Mothers often sliced cabbage thin and sautéed it slowly, letting it soften and release a natural sweetness. Then noodles were added, sometimes with a splash of butter or a sprinkle of salt and pepper, creating a dish that smelled like home even before it reached the table. What made cabbage and noodles special was its versatility. Families could bulk it up with leftover vegetables or a small amount of meat if available, or keep it simple for a completely vegetarian meal. It was a dish that fed both body and spirit, proving that even the simplest ingredients could provide comfort, warmth, and satisfaction. Even today, recreating cabbage and noodles carries a sense of nostalgia. It is a reminder of a time when Americans relied on creativity and resourcefulness to make the most of what they had. Every forkful echoes with the resilience of families who faced scarcity but refused to sacrifice taste or togetherness. The soft noodles, the tender cabbage, the gentle seasoning, all of it tells a story of an era when food was not just nourishment, but a quiet act of hope and care. Cream-chipped beef was a staple on Depression-era tables, a dish that turned a small amount of dried or salted beef into a creamy, hearty meal that could stretch to feed an entire family. During a time when fresh meat was often a luxury, chipped beef provided a way to get protein without breaking the budget. Paired with a simple white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, it became a comfort food that was both filling and surprisingly flavorful. The origins of this dish trace back to military kitchens, where cream-chipped beef, also known as SOS, was served to soldiers as an affordable, nourishing meal. Families quickly adopted it at home, adjusting the recipe with what they had on hand. Some added onions or a dash of pepper, while others served it over toast, rice, or potatoes, making a little meat go a long way. Its flexibility made it invaluable in kitchens where every ingredient had to count. What made cream-chipped beef memorable during the Depression was not luxury, but ingenuity. It taught Americans how to create richness from simplicity, turning dried beef and a basic white sauce into a dish that brought warmth and satisfaction to the table. Children would gather around, eager to scoop the creamy mixture over bread, while mothers took comfort in knowing that even a frugal meal could nourish their families. Today, people recreate cream-chipped beef not just for its flavor, but for the story it carries. Every creamy bite is a reminder of an era when households relied on creativity, thrift, and heart to survive. It is more than a recipe, it is a testament to resilience and the comforting power of food in tough times, a legacy that continues to warm kitchens and hearts alike. Homemade bread was a lifeline for families during the Great Depression, a simple yet essential food that symbolized both sustenance and comfort. With store-bought bread expensive or scarce, households turned to their own ovens to bake loaves that could feed the family for days. Flour, water, yeast, and a pinch of salt were transformed through patience and skill into warm, golden bread that carried the smell of home straight from the oven. Mothers often began the process early in the morning, kneading the dough by hand while children played nearby or helped shape small rolls. The act of baking bread was more than just cooking, it was a ritual of care, creativity, and hope. Each loaf represented effort, resilience, and a promise that, no matter how hard times were, the family would not go hungry. Homemade bread was versatile too. Slices could be toasted for breakfast, used for sandwiches at lunch, or served alongside soups and stews for dinner. Leftovers were never wasted, stale pieces became breadcrumbs or croutons, extending the life of every ingredient. In households across America, bread baking connected families to tradition, heritage, and the simple joy of making something with one's own hands. Even today, the aroma of freshly baked bread evokes nostalgia and warmth. Recreating this recipe is more than just following steps, it is honoring a time when households relied on ingenuity, patience, and love to survive. Each slice reminds us that food can nourish both body and spirit, carrying forward a legacy of resilience. Homemade bread is not just a recipe from the past, it is a symbol of how simple ingredients, when treated with care, can bring families together and create memories that last a lifetime. Water pie was one of the most inventive creations of the Great Depression, a dessert born out of necessity and the desire for something sweet when sugar, butter, and eggs were scarce. Despite its humble ingredients, water, sugar, flour, and a pinch of salt, it transformed into a custard-like filling inside a simple pie crust, surprising families with its delicate flavor and creamy texture. It was proof that even in the toughest times, people found ways to bring a little sweetness into their lives. The recipe gained popularity because it was affordable, simple, and required no special ingredients. Housewives and mothers stretched their limited resources by using water to replace milk or cream, relying on a small amount of sugar and flour to create a custard-like consistency. Sometimes a splash of vanilla or nutmeg was added if available, giving the pie a subtle depth of flavor. It was often served at family dinners, Sunday gatherings, or community potlucks, where neighbors shared their ingenuity in turning minimal ingredients into something enjoyable. What made water pie memorable was its symbolism. It represented resilience, creativity, and hope, proving that even a dish made with the simplest elements could bring joy and satisfaction. Children waited eagerly for slices, their eyes wide with surprise that something so simple could taste so comforting. Mothers took pride in feeding their families not just with sustenance, but with a touch of delight. Today, water pie is more than a quirky dessert, it is a piece of history on a plate. Making it now allows people to connect with the resourcefulness of the past, tasting a recipe that kept families smiling through hard times. Every bite carries the memory of ingenuity, care, and the small victories that helped households survive, proving that sweetness can exist even in the harshest seasons of life. Wacky cake, also known as depression cake, was a marvel of ingenuity during one of America's toughest decades. With eggs, milk, and butter often unavailable, families had to get creative to satisfy their sweet tooth. This humble cake used simple pantry staples, flour, sugar, cocoa, oil, vinegar, and water to create a moist, tender dessert that seemed far fancier than its ingredients suggested. It became a symbol of resourcefulness, showing that a little creativity could transform even the simplest foods into a treat that brought joy. The recipe emerged in countless households across the country, often passed down by neighbors or printed in local newspapers. Mothers and grandmothers learned that the key to its success was folding the ingredients carefully and allowing the chemical reaction between vinegar and baking soda to make the cake rise without eggs. Chocolate was optional but highly prized, turning this otherwise simple dessert into a chocolatey indulgence that children and adults alike eagerly anticipated. What made wacky cake so remarkable was how it reflected the spirit of the era. It was affordable, easy to make, and versatile, sometimes baked in a pan, sometimes as cupcakes, and yet it carried the warmth of care and togetherness. Families gathered in kitchens filled with the rich aroma of cocoa and sugar, sharing moments of comfort in a time of scarcity. The cake taught an important lesson: even when life feels stripped down, simple ingredients and a little ingenuity can produce something delightful. Today, wacky cake remains a testament to resilience and creativity. Baking it now is not just about enjoying a sweet treat, it is about connecting with a generation that made do, found joy in simplicity, and never let hard times steal the comfort of dessert. Each bite carries history, nostalgia, and the quiet triumph of turning scarcity into something surprisingly wonderful. And there you have it, 10 recipes that carried families through one of the hardest times in American history, yet still manage to taste amazing today. From humble stews to inventive desserts, each dish tells a story of resilience, creativity, and love in the kitchen. If you try any of these recipes at home, you are not just cooking, you are connecting with a generation that made the most of what they had, turning scarcity into comfort. If you enjoyed traveling back in time with these flavors, make sure to subscribe and join America's Lost Recipes. We uncover forgotten meals, lost traditions, and the stories behind the food that shaped American homes. Hit the bell so you never miss a taste of history, and leave a comment telling us which Depression-era recipe you want to see revived next. Your next favorite forgotten dish is just a video away.